Welcome. This is a Christmas special designed to help you sleep or relax. I am joined by a friend of mine, Booze and Booze. So please, do the coolest thing you can possibly do for a creator and subscribe to his channel and check out his Christmas special featuring me. And as always, there's only 3 ads in this video after the first 3 stories. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for being here. Now, let's begin. So this all happened way back in the late 1990s, when I was a college sophomore. Me and the girl I was dating at the time had been going steady for about 8 months, and since she was my first real girlfriend, my mom was pretty keen to meet her. And what better time than the holidays to introduce her to the folks? During the week before Christmas, my mom's family traditionally held quite a large gathering up at my uncle's place over in Sandy, in my home state of Oregon. Pretty much all my extended family head out there year after year, from all over the Portland area, and since they had gotten word that I was bringing my girlfriend, the hype to meet her was huge. I won't lie, I was kinda nervous that they would embarrass me in front of her, but that anxiety was totally misplaced. She got on really well with all of them, and despite some playful humiliation, when a cousin of mine told her the story of how I literally peed my pants at the Haunted Mansion ride when I was a kid, they were a credit to me, and when it came to driving her back home, she seemed to be more into me than ever. We'd agreed to drive back down to Eugene at like 7 p.m., so I wouldn't be too tired driving back. But since we had such a good time, we stayed way later than we had planned to, and didn't get on the road until like 10:30 p.m. that evening. In the hopes of making the journey a little faster, I ended up taking the Oregon 211 instead of just sticking to the I-5 south for the whole drive. Annoyingly, this didn't actually make the journey any faster, but point being, the Oregon 211 was pretty much surrounded by farms or these huge swaths of dense pine forest. So as you can imagine, big stretches of it aren't lit very well at all. And for some parts of the drive, we were moving through complete darkness, saved only by our car's headlights. But honestly, I wasn't all that worried about it. I was pretty good at reading a map, and once I was back on the I-5, a road I know pretty well, I figured everything would be all good. So we were just cruising along, in high spirits, talking about how goofy some of my family were, but generally my girlfriend was singing their praises and telling how she couldn't wait to meet them again. It's right around then that we hit a section of the highway that descends down this big old hill, leading up to the bridge crossing over Deep Creek. There, the highway is sandwiched by some of the densest forest you're ever likely to see, and there is absolutely nothing lighting up the highway, so the only thing we can see from the front seats of the car is like maybe 20 to 30 feet that our headlights are illuminating, and pretty much nothing else. But like I said, we're in high spirits, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Right as the highway starts to level off, something darts across the front of us so fast and so suddenly that I barely missed smashing into it. I brake so hard that I almost give the pair of us whiplash. Then, when we're stopped, both me and my girlfriend are in a complete frenzy of, "Oh my gosh, did you see that? What was that?" There are plenty of deer in that area of Oregon, plenty of coyotes too. But the thing that ran out in front of us was way too big to be a coyote. And something about the way it moved gave me this gut feeling that it wasn't a deer either. The shape was just too slender, almost like whatever was out there had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Now, next thing, and I know how completely dumb this sounds in retrospect, but my curiosity just got the better of me, and I decided I wanted to investigate. So, and again, this was also incredibly dumb. I turned the car like 90 degrees on the highway so I could point our headlights into the woods. Yes, This could have caused a horrible accident if another car had come along at the same time I was doing this. But was I thinking straight at the time? No. You see, as a kid growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I'd heard a lot of stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and I'd be lying if I said they didn't capture my imagination. Now, I am not saying that I thought I had caught a glimpse of Gigantopithecus or anything. I know the stories are mostly exact, that just stories, but part of me just wanted to be sure. So like I said, I turned the car 90 degrees, turned on the high beams, and stepped out of the driver's side and onto the highway. I stare off into the trees for a minute or two, but I don't see a thing. Nothing is moving out there. The whole scene was as quiet as the grave. But as I'm looking, I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach, and start to feel as if I had made a huge error in judgment. It was one of the most intensely terrifying feelings I have ever felt in my entire life. A feeling like I was being watched by something predatory. I know it's a huge cliche, and the whole "I felt like I was being watched" thing is such a tired old trope, but I really don't know any other way to phrase it. My heart was pounding. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end. My guts just turned to ice. So without turning my back on the woods, where I expected the danger to come from, I started edging back towards the car. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, I practically jump out of my skin when I hear the car's horn let off one long, excruciatingly loud, extended blast. I mean, it scared me so bad that I almost straight up pissed my pants. Haunted Mansion style. My first thought was that my girlfriend ended up leaning on the horn as she climbed over into the driver's seat for some reason, because she had done that once or twice before. But as I turn back around, I can see she's still on the passenger side, but that she's actually leaning over to push on the horn, in what was evidently a frenzied attempt to get my attention. I run back to the car and ask her if she's okay, but she doesn't say a single word to me. She just points off to a spot about 50 feet away from where we were parked. I spin my head around to see what she's pointing at, and that's when I see it. What was, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that had run in front of our car just a few minutes prior, lit up by the residual light of our high beams. What I saw was really obviously a man, but he was covered in animal furs. What looked like a mishmash of deer skins, bear skins, and elk skins, and on his head, secured in a way I'm not even sure, were these antlers. At the time, because of how close it was to the holidays, I remember the words, "Reindeer Man," just kind of flashing through my head. Maybe in the naive hope that this dude was dressed that way out of some misdirect festive spirit. But he certainly didn't seem in any kind of festive spirit. Not in the least bit. I couldn't see his eyes because of this weird kind of head covering he had on, but I could see his mouth, and at first he kind of looked like he was giving us a smile. Only as I looked, I could see it wasn't a smile at all. This guy was just baring his teeth to us, like the way chimps do as some kind of warning. After that, he turned and walked off into the forest, never to be seen again. Obviously, right after that, me and my girlfriend got out of there and got back on the road towards the I-5. It took us both a while to calm our nerves, but my girlfriend was particularly shaken up, and that's because she had seen something that I hadn't. And as we drove on, she explained exactly what that was. While I had been staring off into the woods, looking for Sasquatch or whatever, she noticed him out of her peripheral vision, but was basically frozen in fear for a moment or two as she watched him walking slowly towards me. Or rather, walking isn't the right word, from how she described it. This guy was stalking, the way a hunter might stalk a deer. The way she put it, she had to summon pretty much all her courage to be able to lean over and honk the horn the way she did. Then, when Reindeer Man had heard the honking, he had backed off a little before I saw him. And like I said, he kind of just froze in place before disappearing. I did a fair amount of online research when I got home to try and find out if anyone else has had run-ins with this guy, but there was absolutely nothing online about him. There are plenty of crazy survivalist types up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm guessing he was one of those. But they tend to be pretty open about their existence, and sometimes even advertise themselves as militiamen or whatever, whereas the reindeer man seemed like he was living completely off the grid. I don't live in Oregon anymore. Me and my girlfriend during the encounter broke up at the end of college, but when we were still together, and I happened to be driving down towards Eugene, I always avoided the stretch of highway that I saw the reindeer man on. I have told this story a lot over the years, and some people honestly just think I'm making it up, like a campfire tale or something. But it's not a tale. It's not made up, and it's definitely not just intended to be some dumb, spoopy story. It's most definitely a warning to anyone traveling on that road at night. Because if my girlfriend wasn't with me when he ran out in front of the car, if she wasn't there to spot him as he crept up on me, only to scare him off with the blast of the horn, I honestly might not be here to warn you guys. So please, this holiday season, drive careful, drive slow, and do not stop, for any reason, on dark, deserted stretches of forest highway.
A few Christmases ago, I was driving my kids back from visiting their grandparents out in the countryside. They moved out to this big old house once my dad sold his business. One of those offer you couldn't refuse things, and which meant he could retire like 10 years earlier than expected. The house itself is amazing. The only problem is that it's in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where the nearest village is like 20 minutes drive away. It's also one hell of a drive to and from the place. One that involves traversing some pretty secluded stretches of motorway. So like I said, it's maybe only a week before Christmas, the 16th or the 17th of December. My kids are really bloody excited about it. My wee lad is 5 years old, a true Santa believer, while my daughter had only just turned 9. So they're starting to cotton on that something isn't quite right about the whole thing. But they still sort of want to believe, if that makes any sense. So when they see a hand-painted, Christmas light dripping sign that says something like Santa's Grotto, 9 miles, they start going ballistic in the backseat, demanding that I take them to see Santa. At first, I straight up refuse. It was a long enough drive without pulling to some lady to spend the better part of an hour nattering away with some old fella in a red suit. But the pair of them threw an absolute fit, to the point where I decided I would get far more peace if I just capitulated and let them spend a few minutes indulging their childish imaginations. Like I said, my eldest was just on the cusp of figuring out that Santa was just mom and dad sneaking out in the middle of the night to take their presents out of the car before stashing them underneath the Christmas tree. Every time I imagined her getting older, getting wiser, figuring things out, becoming a young adult, it had me choking up like nobody's business. So I suppose I just wanted her to enjoy her naivety just a wee bit longer. Besides, once she figured out the truth, it was only a matter of time before she spilled the beans to my youngest. And that was a day I most definitely wasn't looking forward to. So after a few more signs like Santa's Grotto 3 miles, I finally see the turnoff that I needed to take to get into the grotto. It takes me down this long, dark dirt track that at first I thought I might have taken the wrong turn. But lo and behold, after about 5 minutes or so, I see another one of those janky hand-painted signs for Santa's Grotto. The kids are just about ready to burst at this point, but I make it clear that we're not staying any longer than 10 minutes, and they're to be on their best behavior, leaving when I tell them to leave. At least Santa can see what bad little children they are. The threat of coal in their stockings was more than enough to have them promising me to be good. So anyway, I expected a quaint little winter wonderland type of thing, with a few other families milling around. The place was barely even decorated and looked completely deserted. It was a little more than a porta cabin with a few caravans parked around it. Like, I'm not messing when I say whoever was in charge of this place had put more effort into decorating the road signs than the actual site itself. I had a bad feeling from the get-go, but I knew better than to reverse myself and tell the kids to get back in the car. They'd have gone absolutely mental getting so close to meeting Santa, only to be told that I'd just up and changed my mind. So against my better judgment, I decided to give the place a chance. We walked up to the porta cabin, which seems to be the place where the grotto was, and knocked on the door. There was no reply at first, so we knocked again. And as we did so, one of the doors to the caravan swings open. This heavy-set older fellow with a big gray beard sticks his head out and gives me a death stare. I look over at him and in my cheeriest voice ask, "We're here to see Santa. Is he around?" I give a quick nod towards the kids as if to say to the fella, who I was guessing was the one playing Santa, to get himself together so the kids wouldn't throw a fit. He doesn't say a word at first, he just stares at me, almost like looking through me. Like there was nothing behind those eyes at all. He finally says something like, "I'll go and fetch him," then shuts the door, only to reemerge a few moments later dressed in what was without a doubt the worst looking Santa suit I'd ever seen in my entire life. Not only was it lacking any kind of white felt, there's no belt or anything. The bloke had pretty much just rounded up a collection of red clothes, then whacked on a cheap Santa hat to round the look off. And on top of that, the clothes were absolutely filthy, covered in grease stains with a collection of what appeared to be cigarette burns in the pants. He walks towards the kids and asks them if they're excited to see him. They give each other this cartoonish look as if to say, "Who the hell is this guy?" Then the bloke has to repeat the question in a characteristically festive voice before they even really twig to the fact that this was Santa Claus. They just sort of nod at first, watching in confusion as he takes a key from the red pants and unlocks the porta cabin before beckoning them inside. The interior was absolutely terrifying, and even I got the creeps from stepping inside. It was dark and grimy, and the use of cheap Christmas lights managed to give the place kind of a festive torture chamber type vibe, as opposed to the cozy grotto feel they were obviously aiming for. The crowning piece of creepiness was the fact that mounted on one of the walls was what I guessed was an old sheep skull that had some plastic deer antlers taped or glued to the top of it. It would have been creepy enough in broad daylight, but the fact that it was being partially, then fully illuminated by red and green flashing lights gave it a truly hellish aesthetic. Santa sat down on a grubby old couch that stunk of piss and old ale, then smacked his knee as if to invite the kids to go sit on his lap. Neither of them moved. Their lack of reaction prompted Santa to give them something of a scowl, before he curtly asked them what each of them wanted for Christmas. Both of the kids were so nervous by that point that I had to prompt them to reply. The awkward exchange went on for a few more minutes, until I turned to the kids and told them that we had to leave. As I'm ushering the kids out of the porta cabin and back towards our car, I feel a hand grab the crook of my arm and squeeze. I turn to see Santa's face pushed right up against mine, his breath reeking of ciggies and hard booze. "50 quid, he hissed. "Sorry, Santa, I haven't got anything on me," I said, trying to be polite as possible but maintaining a passive-aggressive tone. "But I promise, me and my husband will leave out some extra brandy and mince pies for you on Christmas night, just to make up for it." I don't even know why I was keeping up the pretense by that point. I'm pretty sure the whole experience had scarred my wee lad for life, and it pretty much destroyed any remaining festive belief in my daughter. "Effing B," the Santa growled at my back. Definitely not exactly what he said, but I'm trying to keep this all PG-13, so to speak. Just keep pushing my kids back towards the car, turning back briefly to see that Santa is no longer alone. He was never alone. A gang of other people have filed out of the other caravans and are following us back towards where I parked the car. Then starts off the chorus of Where do you think you're going, love? You haven't paid. He told you. 50 quid. Get your purse out, or we'll get it out for you. My kids were on the verge of tears at this point, and if I'm honest, I wasn't far off either. I gave in, took out my purse, and started sifting through to see if I even had 50 in notes on me. Right as I'm doing that, this kid, this actual bloody child, just snatches the whole thing out of my hand and runs back towards the caravan with it, only to be goaded on by the gang of skanky-looking grown-ups going, "Good lad. That'll teach her." B needed to learn some generosity. It is Christmas after all. I didn't do a bloody thing, well, aside from getting in the car and driving off. The damage control from that bit of horribleness was a hell of a lot of work. And I'm pretty sure it was the singular event that broke my eldest kid's belief, and we had to reassure my youngest over and over that he was just a bad man pretending to be Santa, and that the real Santa would most definitely be putting him on the naughty list for what he'd done. But honestly, I think it's me that belongs on the naughty list for putting my kids in that position in the first place. And for putting myself in the most terrifying Christmas-related event that I've ever gone through. Far, far scarier than my first Christmas with my mother-in-law. If you can believe that.
Every Christmas I'm remembered of this creepy encounter from my youth. This happened when I was really young, and even though the situation could have definitely been worse, it left me scared of strangers for a good while. When I was about 7 to 8 years old, I used to have a classmate whom I adored, Eddie, for the story's sake. I used to go to Eddie's house a lot. His parents owned a small inn in the heart of our little town, and that inn was placed just by a huge grassy field. There was only a small fence separating the inn from the field, so me and Eddie used to skip the fence and go play in that large open space. The field was backed by woods, but they were actually covering a slope above another inn's small parking lot. So when we looked down from the top of that slope, we could see cars parked down there. One day, during the year-end school break, Eddie had the stupid idea of playing with his new BB gun, a fake revolver that shot tiny pellets. I never liked him, so I tried to change his mind, but he was very excited to shoot that BB gun into the woods. Off we went then, hopped to the fence, walked through a patch of that field, and entered the woods. We stood on a flat rock that overlooked the slope and the parking lot down in front of us. Eddie started shooting his gun into the air, and the pellets were hitting everywhere. Trees, rocks, the ground, etc. I shot a little bit too, but was more content with just observing him and the surroundings. I remember that the weather wasn't particularly remarkable, but our town was very foggy and humid, so the mossy ground was slippery. I noticed that the slope we were in seemed to have a trail that went down into the parking lot, as if this patch of woods was actually a shortcut from the parking lot to the field behind us, and vice versa. I saw this and told Eddie, who was definitely not paying attention to me, and kept shooting his BB gun. I was getting very hungry and bored, when suddenly Eddie says that he used all of his pellets. He then had the brilliant idea of shooting pebbles instead, and started loading his gun with tiny rocks we found on the ground. I wasn't into this anymore, but I absent-mindedly helped him find rubble that would fit into the gun, because there was no indication we would be going back to his house anytime soon. Off he went then, shooting pebbles. This time, however, he started aiming down into that parking lot. The space had only 1 or 2 cars and nothing more. Eddie was always a daredevil who liked to defy authority, whereas I was always a good girl who loathed confrontation. So, when I saw where he was shooting at, I started getting really nervous and asked him to stop, because he was for sure going to hit the cars eventually. Eddie obviously did not listen and kept shooting rocks at the cars. Between moments of silence and pleading for him to stop, I could hear the pebbles hitting the tires, the ground, and the roof of the cars. Eddie got bored of reloading his gun and just decided to throw the pebbles directly at the cars. By this point, I was annoyed and very scared about the damage he could inflict, so I threatened to leave on my own. He didn't listen, but tried to persuade me to stay, while still throwing the pebbles mercilessly at the cars. A particularly heavy one hit the roof of the closest vehicle, making a very loud noise. Eddie laughed and squawked to get even more rocks. I will never forget what happened next. I suddenly heard a muffled male voice coming from the parking lot. This sound, that seemed like a growl, was followed by a man opening the door of one of the cars down there. He was so fast and furious that my mind couldn't process his actual presence up until the moment he started climbing the trail upwards in our direction. Since I was only a child, my head was blank during these initial seconds, because I didn't think he actually saw us and knew of our presence. But that was when I noticed his angry, flushed face. He was furious. Nowadays, as an adult, I can fully comprehend his anger, but as a child, being yelled at by a rabid stranger was one of my worst nightmares. As the man kept leaping and getting closer to us, I nudged Eddie hard to show him what was happening, but he wasn't paying attention. Like one of those movies in which the character is so stupid, he wastes precious moments of running away. Eddie kept ignoring me. I nervously said something about a guy chasing us, but he kept brushing it off. By the time the man was a few meters away, I screamed in horror and turned back towards the field, racing away. Luckily, Eddie must have understood the situation and came along. We sprinted down the field, terrified. I looked back and saw the irate man still chasing us, yelling about us ruining his car, that we were gonna pay for this, and that he would kill us. Again, now I totally understand the irritating situation this would be for a grown-up. It's your car. I get it. But the anger in that man was incredibly beyond measure or reason. A normal adult would be mad and could even scream at the children, but I don't think chasing 7-year-olds yelling that you'll murder them is an indication of a sound mind. I was absolutely terrified, but glad that my instincts were fast and I didn't freeze. Racing through the field, we spotted the fence to Eddie's house. We looked frantically at each other and instantly knew we weren't going to be fast enough to climb it, so we kept running. This particular field was surrounded by thick trees on all sides, except by that fence. That meant we were going to hit the trees if we kept running. It wasn't a good option to throw yourself into trees if you're running away from a crazy, angry man. But we had literally no option. To my horror, the guy was getting closer and closer to us, reaching his hand like he wanted to grab us, all the while screaming profanities. I was bawling my eyes out when we got to the trees and stared into each other's panicked faces. Then, we literally threw ourselves into those extremely thick trees and went into them as far as we could. Luckily, these were bushy trees that had foliage from top to bottom, so they formed some kind of fortress that you had to literally fight to get into. We held hands and got deep into those bushes, trying to lose the man who finally got to the trees and kept screaming at us. I never got a good look at him, but I know I had never seen him before and wouldn't be able to describe him later. In that moment, however, it didn't matter to us. We felt like we were going to face some serious violence if we got caught. In a panicked embrace, we finally quieted and stood still in the bushes, praying to God that the frenzied guy wouldn't try to get in there and find us. If he did, we would be done. Thankfully, the man mostly just yelled about how irresponsible little craps we were, and how lucky we were that we didn't ruin his car. He threatened us with beatings if he ever saw us again, etc. His voice was absolutely murderous, and it hurt my ears to hear all that. He tried to see us through the foliage, but just gave up and went away. It wasn't until half an hour later that we managed to get out of the bushes and run to Eddie's house. The man was nowhere to be seen. We cried and hugged some more, but then laughed a little about it. I guess Eddie went back to that slope to get his gun, but I never returned, and I never will. We never told Eddie's parents because he was scared to have his BB gun confiscated. I told my parents, however, and got scolded, but nothing serious. They knew I was a good child, and this was Eddie's doing, so they mostly just explained to me how dangerous and wrong it was to do all that. I was very weary of strange men for a while after this awful event, but learned my lesson and never touched BB guns or threw pebbles anywhere again. I still wonder about the awful things that angry stranger would have done to us if he did catch us, and I shiver.
In an Edinburgh neighborhood of Clermonston in Scotland, Christmas Day 2013, an elderly apartment block resident, Alan Williamson, heard a loud banging on the front door of his apartment. He was reluctant to answer the door, and we can understand why, as he'd had a considerable amount of trouble with a neighbor of his over the past 6 months or so. But given what day it was and how lonely it can be for some elderly people on the most festive day of the year, Alan decided to roll the dice and open up the front door to whoever it was. Possibly in the hopes that it was someone coming to wish him a Merry Christmas. But the only thing that greeted Alan when he opened up the apartment door that Christmas morning was death. The person waiting on the other side of the threshold set upon the elderly man with a 6-inch kitchen knife, stabbing him 29 times in an attack that ended with Alan lying lifeless in a pool of his own blood inside his own apartment. Other residents of the apartment block heard a commotion coming from the apartment and were quick to get in touch with the police to inform them something terrible was going on. Officers arrived to find Alan Williamson dead in his apartment, with the trail of blood leading from Alan's home all the way to another apartment in the same complex. They followed the blood and knocked on the apartment where the blood trail ended, only to find that the door was unlocked. They entered and found 37-year-old Melissa Young in a state of frenzy, covered in blood. The officers asked Melissa if she had just stabbed the man in the apartment across from her, to which they were amazed to find her reply in the affirmative, stating that the power it gave me was amazing. She was promptly arrested, then taken over to a nearby police station for questioning. During her interview, not only did Melissa admit to killing Alan, but she essentially blamed him for provoking the attack, saying that she was enraged that he had professed to not liking a Christmas present that she had bought for him. She then went on to explain that she had managed to get a hold of a pair of sneakers that she believed Alan would like, but they had found the colors on the sneakers to be objectionable. Melissa had tried to explain the colors were unisex, but that Alan had insisted that he did not like them, and that Melissa herself should keep the sneakers. The rejection simmered in her for days, until apparently boiling over on December 25th, when she called on his apartment and murdered him. A subsequent toxicology report revealed that in the immediate aftermath of her arrest, Melissa had trace elements of 4 different illegal drugs in her system, as well as having a blood alcohol content that would have made it illegal for her to drive. During her trial, a doctor told the courtroom that Melissa was an alcoholic that was liable to dangerous and violent outbursts. The doctor also explained that Melissa inhaled solvents daily and was on 14 different prescription drugs, and had even smoked heroin on the morning that she murdered Alan. It also emerged that during the trial that Melissa had been violently harassing Alan for quite some time now, and earlier in 2013, she had actually abducted and assaulted him in a horrific incident that stemmed from a false belief that he had stolen her house keys. Alan was held at knife point for a number of hours, with the situation only ending when Melissa turned her back for a moment, giving him a chance to escape by jumping from the first floor balcony of her apartment and into the garden below. At the end of her trial in 2014, Melissa was sentenced to serve at least 20 years before being eligible for parole, with the judge having previously rejected her plea for a reduced sentence. The court heard that Melissa had a fixation with the Catholic Church, writing letters to the Pope and Cardinal Keith O'Brien, and attending a central Edinburgh church. She also had a tattoo of the Virgin Mary on one arm and one of the devil on the other. She claimed at the trial that the Archangel, St. Michael, had taken over her body and used her as an instrument of God to punish the unclean demon. While passing the sentence, the judge told Melissa, having murdered him, you said about trying to persuade health professionals that you were suffering from diminished responsibility. While it's true that you have a severe personality disorder, it's clear it played no part in what happened that night. You showed no remorse. In fact, you told this court that you were indifferent to his death. In June of 2014, while being held for her trial at the women's prison, Corton Vale, Melissa was convicted of assault after she attacked and bit a female prison officer in the stomach so hard it drew blood. The court heard that Melissa leapt towards the female prison officer, dragging her to the floor by the hair before lying on top of her and striking and biting her. As a result, Melissa was sentenced to a further 6 months imprisonment for the vicious assault, despite her defense attorney attempting to gain sympathy on the account of Melissa's poor mental health, telling the court, there is a substantial medical health background as she has a severe personality disorder. In the aftermath of Melissa's conviction, a prominent Scottish newspaper managed to secure an interview with her old boss, who used to employ her at an adult sauna. The man spoke of her troubled childhood and descent into violence, crime, addiction, and religious mania, explaining that he had to fire her after it was discovered that she had stolen from her clients while working at the sauna. The pair remained friends after she was fired, but the former boss stated that he felt extremely lucky that he didn't end up suffering a similar fate to Alan Williamson after he was forced to let her go. Her former boss also told a story about how he was once at Melissa's home and how he witnessed her playing with a carving knife before telling him, I could kill them all. At the time I thought it was scary, but I also thought she was using it to get attention. Melissa's former employer said during the interview, I don't know if she was talking about killing men or everyone. I feel fortunate to have escaped when I look back now. In many ways, Melissa was a broken person who was never accepted by society. But I wasn't surprised when she carried out this murder. I can picture her stabbing a man 29 times with a knife in a frenzy. Melissa, who is 6'3", and who used the name Chloe at work, was popular with clients at the adult sauna. Young joined a roster of around a dozen women at the sauna in West Annandale Street. But her former boss said that his newest recruit quickly became a volatile source of tension. She had run-ins with all the girls, he explained. They were frightened of her. She would start these fights because she had an inferiority complex. She once told me that she had been pretty severely bullied when she was a teenager. Gangs of kids used to beat her up on the street around the age of 14 or 15. She didn't have much of a life after that. She also suffered from paranoia and thought everyone was talking about her. Her smoking cannabis on a regular basis didn't help at all. She never had any relationships with any men either. It was all one-night stands, of which there were many, and punters. She was too unbalanced to get close to. A heavy drinker since her teens, Melissa was unable to mask her addiction to alcohol and drugs while working at the sauna. Her former employee said that he once found a bottle of vodka that Melissa had stashed in the toilet. Melissa shouted, "That's mine." I told her I was going to flush it and she screamed, "If you do that, I'll kill you." You have to be tough to run a sauna. So I stood my ground and she backed down. But you never knew with her. She was like a tiger who would lash out at any moment. Coworkers also saw Melissa's anger boil over when her former employee took his girls to see the Ladyboys of Bangkok at the Edinburgh Festival. It was going to be a great night, but soon all hell broke loose when Melissa ended up in a fight with this massive woman. The other sauna girls also claimed that Young would steal their possessions, and strongly suspected that she would sell them to pay for drugs. After 9 turbulent months at the sauna, Young had an explosive row with her boss. I'd spent 13,000 pounds on a facelift, and Melissa was very jealous, he said. She also had small breasts and wanted me to lend her 3,000 for a boob job. I refused and said she should save her own money instead of drinking it. Then I found out she had started turning tricks at her flat. I was angry because she was trying to steal our customers. After all this, I sacked her. Melissa was evicted from her apartment after a client knocked on the wrong door and her neighbors called the police. Her former employer said that he witnessed her descent into greater depravity over the years. He claimed she boasted off taking groups of drunken men, as many as 13 at a time, to the back of a nightclub to have sex with her. She was also a serial shoplifter who had clothes worth thousands of pounds piled in her flat when she was arrested. The interview with her former employer painted a picture of a highly disturbed person who exacerbated their poor mental health with the habitual use of hard drugs and alcohol. Someone that was so disconnected with any sense of human decency that they'd murder a person over a Christmas present. Maybe this Christmas, we should all be a little more grateful for the gifts we receive. You never know who might take the rejection to heart and plot a terrible, bloody revenge.